Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers, and this is a mini episode I do on the weekends for really just diving into things that have come up in my work, either that week or just generally coming up quite often. And today, we're talking about this desire that our female partners, our feminine partners, need for emotional connection and depth. Because this comes up a lot. And I'm going to little plug here for my program that's coming up on the 17th of September, Breaking the Chains of Avoidance. And this is something that we're going to really dive into, emotional depth and connection, and really giving you the tools and the embodied practices and the accountability as well to cultivate this in yourself. This program is for men who are single or in relationship, who are wanting to really unshackle themselves from avoidance and how it's been holding them back. I want to step into a new way of relating, which is full of connection and full of love, full of open-heartedness, full of courage as well, because that's something I often see is really lacking for men, is this courageousness in love, courageousness in loving. So, meeting your partner's emotional needs. What's getting in the way? The first thing that's getting in the way, always is, for men, is a lack of emotional capacity, right, in themselves. Think of it, emotional capacity like buckets. If you have a small bucket, like a child has a small bucket. I've got a 4-year-old nephew. And I've got a 8-week-old son, 2-month-old son. Sorry, I've taken a few days off him. Now, I've noticed Bjorn, my son, his emotional bucket is very small, very, very small. If he experiences any level of discomfort, he just starts to scream, right? My 4-year-old nephew, his emotional bucket's a bit bigger. He can withstand a bit of, discomfort and express his emotions a bit better and blah, blah, blah. He's more available to his feelings and emotions. But there comes a point where it's too much for him quite often, right? Where he can't express himself, he can't feel what's there. Now, you're an adult and you need to have a very large bucket. And as you've noticed there over the years, your bucket doesn't get bigger just with age. There's a point where for a man, I think that a lot of, and this is different for different men, some men, their emotional bucket is like a 14-year-old, Some are like maybe more wise men, but not very many, in that they can kind of hold the depth of feeling and emotion that can be held in their very big bucket. Or, you could argue some men are like a swimming pool, they've got so much depth in their emotional capacity that they are felt really deeply, right? But if you're struggling with this capacity and you're struggling with being emotionally available, being able to express and feel and tell your partner what's there, this is going to be the number one issue that you're struggling to create emotional depth. And it's like you can't engage in emotional conversations. You get distracted, unconsciously distracted, consciously distracted. You may find yourself like just disconnecting from feelings or undervaluing feelings, or, feeling like you're always unheard or your partner's always unheard, for instance, right? Or when deep conversations come up, you get nervous, you get worried, you don't want to make a mistake, you don't want to say the wrong thing. Very, very common. This feeling of like, oh, if I say the wrong thing, she's going to fly off the handle, right? And there's some truth in that sometimes, but sometimes that's just because maybe you haven't been listening, right? Or you need to have a conversation, and we'll talk about it later on, have a conversation, be like, hey, love, my darling, Joanna, whatever your partner's name is, or whatever you call her, right? When you want to have a conversation about emotionally, triggering things, I'm just asking for some grace. That like, I might have opinions that are different from you, or I may not be able to articulate myself. So I'm asking for some grace and compassion and empathy, because I know that this is something you really want and I want to give it to you, but I need you to be able to like actually hear what I'm saying, or give me some space to think, or so forth, and not just, want me to agree with you or say what you say, and be able to swim in the sea of different emotions and feelings and ideas. And that's just a little tidbit of why I would definitely have that sort of conversation. Another thing that gets in the way is a struggle with understanding emotional needs. And again, this is rooted in a lack of capacity. Is where you're not able to kind of identify your partner's feelings and emotions, right? And not being able to kind of like be like, oh, she's feeling kind of sad. Like, how do I talk to her about this topic she's in? Or, oh, she's talking to me about this thing and I can tell that her voice is raising. She's getting really passionate about this thing. And like, how do I then interact with her in that state? You're not noticing her emotional needs or how she needs you to tread, not necessarily carefully, but like mindfully and consciously with what she's feeling. And maybe you misinterpret some of the emotional cues, right? Create frustration, feel like you've messed up, you fucked up, you're being attacked, so you shut down, and so forth, right? This is very common, very, very common, right? There's also this thing I've mentioned a few times about making mistakes. This fear of like, I don't want to make mistakes. Mistakes are bad. And this is really standard avoidant behavior. Like somewhere we had very strict parents and mistakes are bad. So it's better to say nothing than to make a mistake, right? Which isn't necessarily true. It actually causes a lot of harm in relationship. So we run away from actually kind of delving into things because we don't want to make mistakes. And then there's a fear of intimacy that come up. Emotional intimacy, this fear of expressing what you feel because, if I express what I feel, she may take advantage of me, she may use it against me, and all these sorts of things, right? And, we've all got instances in our life where there's some truth in this, but it doesn't mean that it's always true or it's true most of the time. But the impact of this creates isolation for you, right? You don't feel deeply connected to people. This might be affecting your friendships, your family relationships, and so forth. I've worked with plenty of men who actually come to my door and come to work with me, and they're just really, really, they're really distant. They really don't have friends. They don't have people they can turn to and talk to and pick up the phone to and so forth. And often it's, not always, but sometimes, created by themselves or co-created by themselves. Why is this important? Creating emotional depth. If your partner is desiring this, right, then she has a need. She has a deep need to be felt, to be understood, and to be led to a realm of experience that she cannot lead herself alone. So this might be an emotional realm, right? She wants to feel the world in a different way or a different perspective, or she wants to feel parts of herself that are deeper than she can get to on her alone. And she would love to go there with you. Right? And if you can't take her there, then the chances are that she'll feel dissatisfied in this area, right? That dissatisfaction can spread and there could be a general dissatisfaction about the relationship, and that can cause the end of your relationship. One of the other benefits of this, of going deep into this, is actually a deeper experience of your relationship, a unearthing of the parts of yourself that maybe you weren't allowed to express and show, your vulnerability, your openness, your sensitivity, all these things. So you get to grow emotionally and personally into parts of yourself that you didn't know were there. But also this allows you to take those bits of you into other parts of your life. And here's the thing, you won't know what you're missing because you've never had it. If you've never had emotional range and emotional capacity, you won't know that you don't. Maybe some indicators are like, maybe you get defensive, maybe you're a bit short-tempered, maybe you are a little bit shut down emotionally, and maybe you struggle to connect with people, like build friendships and relationships. Now, what would your life be like if those things weren't there and you thrived in creating relationships? You weren't defensive, you actually invited people's different opinions and feedback and critique about yourself, right? You were wonderful at creating deeper relationships with your family and friends and new people. Like, how would your life be then? How would your life improve, right? This is the sort of thing you want to start thinking about. So how do we do this, right? One of the simplest ways to start with is actually just learning to listen. I know I feel like I'm always talking about listening on my podcast, but it's so important to just listen, to focus on what you're hearing, right? And what's being said and emotions and so forth. And then just take this a level deeper, not just listening to what you're hearing, but also paying attention with your eyes. Like, what am I seeing in her? Like, oh, she's talking very animatedly about women's rights. Okay. Oh, okay. And then again, noticing what's in you. Oh, wow. I'm feeling a bit nervous. It's important to notice that. Oh, but this seems like there's something really important to her, feeling her like this is something that's important to her, something she's really passionate about, really meaningful to her. And it might be a case of, oh, I get that this is, something like I really get this is really, really meaningful and important to you. This might seem like a really stupid question, right? And, it might be like, why is this particular issue here that you're talking about so important to you? Not just to women in general, to you. I'm really curious. And then you get a whole new experience, right? And I know you're like, oh, she's going to say to me, I should know. It's obvious. And it's not. And this is where, like as a coach, I ask some very obvious questions. But that's why I was very particular. Why is it important to you? Not to all women or the furthering of the world. Why is it important to you? And to pay attention, because she may stray off what's important to her. And why is it important to women in general? And you may bring her back and go, I get that's really important to women, but why is it really important to you? Why is it so meaningful to you? And she may have a really personal story of something she's experienced or something she's seen. And this will help you have a deeper emotional experience of her. So as you see there's feeling your emotions, there's hers, there's the moment, there's a situation, all these things. And I know that sounds like a lot, but you can break those down into listening. And then there's developing your own emotional awareness in yourself. And you have to do two things at once, listening and noticing your own feelings. So you don't get those muddied, because sometimes we'll listen to someone and we'll be like, oh, they're making me anxious. They're not making you anxious. They're just speaking. You are taking what they said to mean something, then that makes you anxious, worried or nervous, right? And it's really important to do this. And this emotional work for yourself is to like notice what you're feeling. That might be journaling. That might be journaling with the emotional wheel, which is something I use very, very often. You can Google that and find one, or you can send me an email and I'll send you the one that I use. It might be to do some somatic work where you actually really notice, tell yourself, go through some stories of your life, maybe some journaling again, and like really notice the different feeling you feel in your body, in your chest, in your stomach, your solar plexus, your throat. These are often the places that our emotions show up or are felt, obviously. And you can notice like, oh, when I think about that time my mum told me off, my chest gets tight and my throat gets tight. Oh, okay, what's that about? What emotion does that map to? And then we start to be like a little adventurer, a little Indiana Jones of our emotions, really searching through them and looking what's there. The next thing is empathy, right? This is a really important thing, empathy. And I think one of the best ways to cultivate empathy is to read and listen and watch stories and experiences of people that are nothing like you. Real world situations are great. So like documentaries, movies that are really based on true stories. And it could be podcasts. If you are a white man listening to this, listen to the experience of the suffragettes, about the suffragettes in the 30s, 40s. But I might have got the years a bit wrong there. My history's a bit out. Or you might want to learn about the civil rights movements, right, in the 60s and 70s. Or you may want to learn about and not just the movement, also about people, individual people in there, like what their experiences, what their lives were like. Or you may want to, learn about, what it was like to be a peasant farmer in the kind of Chinese Revolution, right? And learn about some individual person's experience. And the importance of this is because you start to listen to the story and start to think, wow, what would that feel like to be in that situation, to live that life? And you start to expand your empathy range beyond people who are just like you or just sound like you. And you start to be like, oh shit, like being a peasant farmer during the Chinese Revolution was really difficult. And man, people lost their homes. And then you can think to yourself, how would I feel if these things happened to me right now in my life? Right? How would it feel if I was a woman and I was a suffragette and I wasn't allowed to vote? I wasn't allowed to get a bank account unless, my wife came with me, or at that time as your husband or father came with you, right? What would it have been like to not be able to own property? Not be able to go to work? What would it feel like if I felt scared to walk down the street late at night? And really feel it for a moment, like stop and feel. And this will create a lot of compassion and empathy for you, right? Something I do in my programs with men is I get men to express their stories so they listen to each other, right? And I share stories of the women I know and the other men I've met. So we start to develop more empathy and listening. And I touched on this one earlier and I'll say it again. You want to cultivate curiosity. Really important when it comes to creating depth is curiosity. Because if we just tackle everything on the surface layer of like what we hear first time round without asking any questions or wanting to go deeper or asking to hear more, we're just skirting on the surface of things. And depth can't be created on the surface. As you know, when you go into a pool, There's no depth on the surface. It's shallow. That's what the whole thing is, right? But then we have to dive deeper, and sometimes it's a bit heavier, a bit more uncomfortable, and we have to be a bit brave. We have to be a bit courageous, just like we are when we're diving in the water. Not that I know, because my swimming isn't the best. So, but here's the thing. You have to have curiosity and courage as well. Curiosity and courage. Wonderful cocktail that is. Right? You can create miracles in life if you can cultivate curiosity and courage. Another thing, and probably this will be the last one I say, is allow yourself to really feel the beauty and the ugliness of things and of life as well. So you might sit by a tree, right, and just be and wonder of this tree, like really think like, wow, this tree's been here for 30, 40, 50 years, all the wonderful things it's seen, the beauty. You look at its leaves and the intricate details on the leaves, and you can marvel at the beauty. And you may also then walk over to a bin near where you live on the street where it's overflowing, and you can really sit with the ugliness of the fact that, you know, this bin is overflowing, people are just throwing things on the floor, how that impacts your eyes of just walking down the street, how it could impact a small child if he decides to, you know, a toddler to walk and pick up some of this stuff, or, you know, all these things you can feel beyond just the thing you see, but also the impact of the thing being there, right, on people, and not just gloss over and go, oh, no one cares about the bin. People do care about the bin, right? It does disturb upon our tranquility and our ability to see what looks good. So it's like feeling deeper, thinking deeper beyond the obvious without rationalizing and saying, oh, no, it's okay, it's fine, but actually feeling the ugliness, the beauty of things, of life, of instances, of moments as well. And then also cultivating, looking at things from different angles. That's also a really great way to cultivate more emotional depth. It's like looking at things from multiple angles. You know, it could be a civil rights issue in your world, or it could be someone speaking and like you hear their angle, and then you think of another angle, like what's someone else who's maybe the person this person is aggressing against, right? Or the person that this person is oppressing in some way. Like looking at things in multiple angles, it just gives you a deeper experience of what's occurring. And then you can bring this into your relationship. You can talk about these things. Again, you've got courage and curiosity to have these conversations, and you have boundaries to say to your partner, maybe, you know, when they speak to you in certain ways, because this often comes up in my work, is the guys are like, oh, I'm trying to create emotional depth, but when I talk about subjects and I don't say the right thing, or I say something she disagrees with, then she goes off at me, you know, and shouts at me. And you go, okay, you create boundaries. Go, hey, if you want to have these conversations, we're going to have them in a certain way, you know, with no shouting, name calling or belittling. Like, my opinion is as valuable as yours. Just because you don't agree with it, that's fine. I'll listen and you may change my opinion, but name calling, shouting, you know, all those sorts of things isn't good enough, right? Isn't something I'm willing to tolerate. Boundaries, you know, sometimes I'll voice opinions. I won't say that too many, to also that, you know, or I'll look at something from a particular angle, for instance, and also be like, wow, that's kind of like wild, David, to start there. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but can you see the truth of what I'm saying? I'm not saying I'm right, but that there is some essence of truth in what I'm saying. Or I'm not saying it is the only truth, but it is just one of the many truths out there, you know, and have conversations like that. And then you have these experiences of emotional depth in your relationship. You create them yourself. Ooh, that kind of flew out the mouth. Like I said, I've got this program, Breaking the Chains of Avoidance, because if you're avoiding, you're going to have these deeper emotional experiences because you're going to avoid them because emotions are uncomfortable. You've been taught emotions are bad, consciously and unconsciously through your lifetime. You've been taught you can't trust people and all these things. So we're going to build that inside the community, inside of the program, where we build trust, we build community, we create a depth between the men, emotional expression, and all these sorts of things, this ability to deepen and create intimacy, and as well as dealing with some of the fears and anxieties and worries about being avoidant, right? And I've been there, you know, as you've listened to my podcast before, that's my experience. That's how I was for many years, and it's still something that comes up a little bit here and there, you know, especially when you dive into levels of commitment of having a baby like myself. But, you know, I have the tools now to work with it. Well, all right, guys, I'll let you get on with the day and say ciao, ciao.